where do you assign the power in relationships? Very precisely, where do you assign the power in relationships? There's only one power. I am. Appearing as, animating all that appears to reflect what the individual believes. If the individual believes that harmonious relationships, ideal harmonious relationships, are naturally the way relationships play out, then that is their experience, which I consider to be a belief of truth. True self-acceptance, being as I am, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. So I encourage ideal, harmonious relationships from the premise of truth, being as I am. If relationships do not appear that way, then the individual is identified with untrue belief, and it plays out accordingly. Now, we may study individuals who seem to be very attractive, have wonderful relationships, appear to be very charismatic, have a high degree of personal magnetism. And we may observe what they say, what they don't say, what they do, what they don't do, their body language, etc., and form conclusions that if we replicate what they are doing, then we too would get the same results. And what I found from my experience and working with thousands of others is that may or may not be true. What we're interested in, we go straight to the source from the premise of truth, being as I am, which manifests as authentic, harmonious relationship and experiences in relationships, etc. From the premise of truth, being as I am, true self-acceptance and true self-expression, in and as the outer experiences of life, which include ideal, harmonious relationships. So, this is something to consider. He says the facts of the suggestionist, so he's speaking of those that could be considered to be magnetic, charismatic, have ideal, harmonious relationships, yet seem to act in a certain way, say things in a certain way, behave in a certain way. And people may look at what they're doing and try to mimic it. So he's being very precise here, where he's talking about those that model habitual patterns, behavioral patterns, conversational patterns, etc., to consider a key point which I would like to emphasize in today's conversation. So he says, the facts of the suggestionists are undoubted. So again, suggestionists can be referred to anyone that could be considered to be attractive, magnetic, charismatic, etc. But they may make the mistake of ignoring the mental states of the suggestionist. They think that their effects are produced by suggestion alone. So he's talking about suggestive manners, physical expressions, and forget the mental state behind the suggestion, which is the real motive force. I always say this, and you've heard me say this thousands of times, and it's worth mentioning again and again and again. Everything happens ideally, automatically from the premise of being as I am. True self-acceptance, and thus reflects as what we can call true self-expression. What you say, what you don't say, what you do, what you don't do, everything happens ideally, automatically, and thus naturally from the mental state. And so, what is the individual's mental state when it comes to relationships? Well, it is appearing in and as the relationships. That is where the individual has assigned the power, the one unseen power that takes what the individual imagines and appears as and animates all that appears to reflect what the individual imagines. I am. I am represents everything, the all. There's no one that does not spring from the source and substance of the entire phenomena of life. So, what does the individual say of that I am? Well, it's revealed in the appearances. So that's what I mean by where do you assign the power in relationships? What does the relationship appear as? Ideal harmonious relationships from the premise of truth, being as I am, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, or from the premise of untrue belief identification in the individual mind. So attention reveals what the individual is identified with, the beliefs. So William Walker Atkinson articulates this really well. He says involuntary attention and voluntary attention. So the individual may consciously put their attention on certain aspects of the conversation, let's say in a relationship, or you could say give gratitude to certain appearances in the relationship, which they would consider to be from the premise of truth, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, which is then mind purifying, because as they do that and continue to do that, it purifies the mind from the untrue beliefs. Now, what is also valuable for insight as to what the individual is identified with in mind, which reveals untrue beliefs, confessing I am not, is revealed in what he refers to as involuntary attention. So let's explore this. He says, involuntary attention is that form of attention which you give to passing objects which arouse your interest or curiosity, or even by your passing notice. Your attention is attracted easily to such objects or events without any effort on your part. This form of attention is an almost automatic, instinctive, or purely reflex action arising from the stimulation of the senses or appeal to the feelings. So involuntary attention, going in a direction from the premise of untrue beliefs, is the result of identification. And so no shame and condemnation. It's interesting to observe where our attention goes automatically. And rather than fighting against the circumstances and pointing fingers and blaming another person, what is being proposed here is go within. Bring awareness to what has been identified with in the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind stores the beliefs in which the unseen power takes those beliefs and animates all that appears to reflect what the individual has stored in the subconscious layer of mind. Remember, you have a mind. You transcend the mind. You also have the gift, speech, inner speech. As stated in the Hermetica, 2 gifts were bestowed upon humanity. They were mind and speech. And mind has the conscious and subconscious aspect. The conscious is where you choose. You can voluntarily place your attention on particular aspects of the relationship, give gratitude to them if they are from the premise of truth, which impresses the subconscious mind, and then you experience more of that, because that's what the unseen power does. It doesn't shame or condemn or judge you. It simply takes what the individual imagines, and then some way, somehow, appears as, animates all that appears to reflect what the individual imagines. When it comes to relationships, this is the case as well. So again, voluntarily, we can do that. What is also valuable is the involuntary attention. And by that I mean, it reveals what we are identified with. So here are 7 kinds of beliefs that an individual can be identified with, which are revealed as inharmonious relationships. And if awareness is brought to these beliefs through a conversation like this, having a conversation like this, and perhaps autosuggestion, or being still in the moment, if the individual is about to react to these beliefs, which is very apparent by thinking, emotional relatability to the appearances, behaviors, etc., they can in that moment be still to release that identification and operate from the premise of truth. Because beyond the individual I am. Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Which from the premise of being as I am, mind is purified. And then the relationships appear to transform. I've seen this many times in my life. There were times in relationships where an untrue belief played out, which is not from the premise of truth. Being as I am. Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. It played out as, here are some examples. Constant need for validation, fear of abandonment, dependency, jealousy and possessiveness, self-image components, such as the individual believing that they're unlovable or undeserving of a harmonious relationship, inharmonious communication, comparison to other people. Every individual knows that if the experience, it is not what the individual truly desires, which is to be as I am, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, then these are untrue beliefs identified with by the individual, which they may have formed through various thinking patterns in relation to experiences that the individual had, and thus formed untrue beliefs. So involuntary attention, that attention goes in a particular direction to reveal. So you're walking down the street, your attention maybe goes to two people walking across the street, and they look happy together. From the premise of truth, genuinely, you see it. Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, in and as that appearance. Now the individual may look at that and react to that inwardly, revealing identification to a particular belief. For example, they may begin to think thoughts of not being lovable. So if they saw that relationship from the premise of being as I am, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, then there's no identification to an untrue belief. And so if the untrue belief has been identified with, no shame and condemnation. Release identification to that particular belief by being still and knowing that I am. Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. True self-acceptance in the moment. And or turn it into autosuggestions if the belief seems to persist in mind, and more specifically, the subconscious mind, which stores the beliefs, which again, the unseen power takes those beliefs and appears as and animates all that appears to reflect what the individual believes, not as a form of punishment, but that is what the individual had subconsciously said I am too, which is a form of, and William Walker Atkinson had brought this up before in one of his books, he called that involuntary autosuggestion. In other words, the individual did not practice awareness because each individual has the ability to choose how they relate to every experience that appears. And based on what they relate to the appearance, that is what they form as far as beliefs go, in mind, in which again, the unseen power, beyond shame, condemnation, judgment, doesn't tell you what you should or should not believe. The individual determines that. Yet the individual truly desires to be as I am, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. So it's interesting. All I truly desire is to be as I am, as I always say. So knowing that truth, being as I am, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, it is very apparent in relation to the appearances based on thoughts, emotional relatability, and behaviors, and more specifically, what the individual is relating to the behaviors that determines what the individual is identified with, the subconscious belief in mind, and more specifically, as mentioned, the subconscious mind. They are consciously aware of, through the appearance, via the involuntary attention. So in other words, they didn't shame or condemn themselves, that their attention brought awareness to this belief. They are now aware of what they are identified with. So they release identification through perhaps an autosuggestion. Like, for example, fear of abandonment. They could say, I realize that I am worthy of being as I am, as I and the Father are one. Thus, I am being as I am, wherever I am. And others reflect that realization of being as I am, appearing as love, fulfillment, happiness-based relationships, beyond condition, everywhere I am. Then the individual realizes that they are always whole, complete, have everything, and they actually embody it. They witness it in their thoughts in relation to completion, wholeness. They experience it emotionally. So a personal example would be when I was at one point interested in someone and I sent them a text message, they didn't reply back, or they took a while to reply back, whatever that means, because that's individual interpretation in relation to I was determining whether that was a condition or not for happiness. In other words, if they replied back by this particular time, then I can be happy. And they replied back at this other time, then I would not be happy. Or if they did not reply, then I would not be happy. That is not being as I am. Being as I am, knowing that I am, happiness. Thus, being as I am is unconditional to appearances. So whether they message me or not, happiness. So it would play out that way. It would be, we can say, an experience of suffering, mentally generated, based on identification to that belief. So, involuntary attention. Whatever our attention appears to go on is revealing what we are identified with. Involuntary, so wherever the attention goes, no shame and condemnation. Bring awareness to the belief in which attention appears to go in that direction. Voluntary attention is where you consciously give your attention to particular objects or subjects or aspects of the relationship. So for example, if you had a wonderful date with someone that you went out with, the individual can give gratitude to all the different wonderful experiences that they had on the date. Perhaps how the date was genuinely interested in the conversation that they were having, complimented them, etc. I can assure you, as the individual gives attention to those appearances, as the individual thinks feelingly, as in, I am, the unseen power takes those suggestions and generates more of those appearances. Now, as the individual continues to do this, more and more so, while also, if attention involuntarily goes in a direction in which it could reveal something, let's say, constant need for validation, fear of abandonment, dependency, jealousy, and possessiveness, comparison to others, no shame and condemnation. Be still and know that I am. Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. If those beliefs seem to persist in mind, turn them into affirmative autosuggestions that are from the premise of truth. Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. To purify the mind from those beliefs. And what happens then? You know what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do. You'll notice that the entire mental state changes, which a mental state is a body of beliefs. And the beliefs, as mentioned, are stored in the subconscious mind, in which involuntary attention reveals, and no shame and condemnation, release the identification if those beliefs are untrue, and reimagine yourself to be ideally from the premise of truth, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Be as I am. Now, as that happens, then we understand what he's referring to. The mental states of the suggestionist, so the individual that we would consider to be attractive, charismatic, personally magnetic, everywhere they go, they have wonderfully harmonious relationships, friendships, etc. We may look at what they say, do, don't do, etc., and we will see that all of those expressions arise naturally from the mental state that they embody. And that is where they are assigning the power. And so the power, the unseen power, the formless unseen power, in which the individual determines how the power appears, the individual is determining the power to appear as those expressions of body language, what to say, what not to say, ideal harmonious relationships, everything. Because as mentioned, there's only one power that takes what the individual, you have a mind, you can individually place in mind, consciously, which through repetition is impressed on the subconscious mind by thinking feelingly from the premise of being those ideal attributes, which you truly are. true self-acceptance, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. And they play out more so each day as ideal, harmonious relationships. And what you say, what you don't say, your behaviors, etc., all those things happen ideally, automatically, and naturally by being as I am. And so it could be tempting to look at what others are doing and try to mimic their behaviors. As mentioned, that could be a hit or miss. Yet when we go straight to the source, that I am, and be as I am, and embody that, which our degree of embodiment is revealed by where our attention goes. And if the appearances, the individual interprets them from the premise of untrue beliefs, that's mind purification opportunity. As I say, all I truly desire is to be as I am. So knowing that all you truly desire is being, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, involuntary attention, if attention automatically goes in the direction where the individual only sees, or sees more often, you could say, the untrue beliefs, that is happening automatically. And that can change. How do you change it? Practically, step by step. How do you do it? Start now. Now is where all the power is. All power is now. Now, what you imagine when it comes to relationships, do you see yourself in ideal, wonderful, harmonious relationships? That I am. Do you see yourself having wonderful conversations, wonderful relationships, life experiences? That I am. It's from the premise of truth, fulfillment. As I always say, desire means having. What does one do when they accept what they desire inwardly? By capturing the feeling of fulfillment. You could say they fulfill it within, while that feeling of fulfillment is actually calling upon the unseen power. As mentioned, there's only one power in relation to the title. Where do you assign the power in relationships? It's calling upon that power to appear and appear to animate all that appears to reflect that particular form of fulfillment. So always go to the end. Be as I am. Go straight to the source. Being as I am in relation to appearances. And if attention automatically appears to go in a direction that reveals untrue beliefs, release identification to those beliefs. Because here's another key. By releasing identification to the untrue beliefs, all that remains is truth. All that remains is being as I am. By releasing identification to the untrue beliefs, all that remains is being as I am. Because truly, there's only God. Only God appearing, only God animating all that appears in and as what appears as individual experience. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You could say, being as I am, attention automatically goes in the direction to reflect being as I am, reflecting in and as ideal, harmonious relationships from the premise of truth, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, Sat Chit Ananda. From the premise of being as I am, it is clear to understand, to affirm truth, to appear in and as the truth that I am. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.